When you talk to most really talented star chefs, the words I and me and my tend to come up a lot. Nothing wrong with that. It takes a big ego to do what chefs do, to keep them going in the face of absurd odds, uncertain outcomes, long hours, and hot spaces. My cuisine, my cooking, my kitchen, my cooks, my approach to food. You've heard that before. I do it all the time. So it's striking to talk with Thomas Keller, to listen to this quiet, surprisingly modest man describe his restaurant as an institution, not as a personal enterprise or as the spawn of his own personal genius. Here's the guy whose cookbook is widely seen as the ultimate in food porn. Upon the mention of the chef's name, other chefs, no matter how great, become strangely silent, uncomfortable looking, even frightened. In a subculture where most of us are all too happy to slag anybody at any time, you never hear anyone, even the French, talk trash about Keller. One Frenchman, I believe, even called him the greatest French chef in the world. What's missing from all the wild praise of Keller, his cooks, his restaurant, and his cookbook, is how different he is. You can't honestly use terms like the best or better or even perfect when you're talking about Thomas Keller, because he's not really competing with anybody. He's playing a game whose rules are known only to him. He's doing things most chefs would never attempt, in ways unthinkable to most. Everything about him and the French Laundry experience is different from most fine dining experiences, and Keller himself is a thing apart. A man hunting much bigger game with very different ambitions than most of his peers. Talking with the man as he walked through a small farm that grows him vegetables, watching his chef de cuisine pull baby leeks and garlic right out of the ground for that night's dinner. And later, as he showed me around the grounds of the French Laundry after dinner, when he sat down with me in the dark garden, sipping an after-work glass of wine, it was evident how unusual his priorities are and to what lengths he's willing to go to attain them. The building itself looks like an unassuming country home, rustic-looking wooden stone surrounded by green fields, farmlands, and vineyards in the small community of Yountville in the Napa Valley. There are 2 stories, an upstairs deck with a plain wooden balustrade, and a pretty garden. The decor, like the service, is unassuming, comfortably casual, with everything, the room, the waitstaff, the view of the hills outside the windows and through the French doors, conspiring to put the diner at ease. The service, though relentlessly sharp and efficient, is not stiff or intimidating. The waiters are neither too friendly nor too distant. For Keller, the French Laundry is a cause. It is the culmination of a philosophy shared by the people who work with him. Every detail is inseparable from the whole, whether it's new steps to the porch or a new dish on the menu. He brought up the famous Saigon in Paris as an example of the kind of place he aspires to leave behind someday. You don't know the chef's name at Saigon, do you? No, it's the restaurant you remember, the institution, the tradition. Though he's a legendary perfectionist, lives next door to his kitchen, and takes a hands-on approach to every tiny detail, what he has created in Yountville is a place inseparable from its community and suppliers, where the absolute best ingredients are treated with the highest degree of respect. Think I'm exaggerating? Maybe I've gone over to the dark side, flacking for a chef I hope will someday throw me a freebie, maybe blurb my next book? No, you haven't seen how he handles fish, gently laying it down on the board and caressing it, approaching it warily, respectfully, as if communicating with an old friend. Maybe you've heard some of the stories, that he used to make his cooks climb up into the range hoods each day to scrub out the grease personally, how he stores his fish belly down in the swimming position, that every fava bean in his kitchen is peeled raw, never soaked, how his mise en place, his station prep, is always at an absolute minimum, everything made fresh. Maybe you've heard about his unbelievably beautiful, elaborate 15-course tasting menus, seen pictures of food so perilously balanced, so perfectly posed that you don't know how it ever gets to the table. They feed about 85 people a night at the French Laundry. They employ, all told, about 85 people. An army of similarly dedicated purveyors comb lonely stretches of the Pacific Northwest at night, some armed only with flashlights, looking for the telltale phosphorescence of a particular wild mushroom. People grow things to his specifications. The simplest-looking garlic chip garnish at the French Laundry can require the skills of a microsurgeon. Getting Keller's agreement in advance, I'd brought with me 2 famous chefs and a writer, Scott Bryan, Eric Ripert, and Michael Ruhlman. We were going to have a 20-course tasting menu. A 20-course tasting menu, under the most favorable circumstances, is a challenge to any chef. A 20-course tasting menu for a party of fellow chefs is for most of us a reasonable rationale for a nervous breakdown. But try to imagine, turning out 4 distinct and different 20-course tasting menus for that one table of chefs, only 2 or 3 courses in common. Over 60 different plates of food hitting one party of 4 and doing it at the same time as serving a full dining room of regulars, many of whom are also having elaborate multi-course tasting menus. And you get the idea when I say that Thomas Keller is different. The meal took 6.5 hours, with very little, if any, waiting between courses. 4 different little oyster dishes would arrive, and we would all first look down at our own plate, then glance longingly at the others. For a while, we'd taste a little, sawing off a tiny bite of oyster, for instance, and pass our plates counterclockwise so the others could try. After many bottles of wine and many courses, some of us just stopped passing. How do you cut a single oyster into 4 portions? It's hard. Some get more than others. In the highly charged atmosphere where everybody wants to try everything, this can lead to disputes, maybe violence. By the time the meat and fowl began hitting the table, I just hunched over my plate and said, "Don't even think about it. You can try this one next time." There was a lot of head shaking and sighing going on. Who among us in the whole wide world of chefs would attempt this? It was far and away the most impressive restaurant meal I'd ever had. Let me give you a closer look. Keep in mind that Scott, Eric, and Michael were simultaneously enjoying equally elaborate and yet different dishes. The meal began with the French Laundry's signature amuse, tiny little coronets of salmon tartare served in a cone rack like at Baskin-Robbins, the inspiration for the dish. We all knew they were coming. We'd seen them in the cookbook. In my guest case, they'd had them before. In addition to being delicious, it's psychological manipulation at its most skillful. You can't help but be charmed. The cute little cones wrapped in tiny paper napkins press long disused buttons in the sense memory section of the brain. You feel like a kid again, your appetite jump-starts, and a breathless sense of anticipation comes over you. You need to know, what's next? Here's what I had next. Puree of Robinson Ranch shallot soup with glazed shallots, English cucumber sorbet with pickled cucumber and a dillweed tuile, Yukon Gold potato blini with shiitake mushrooms and chive butter, cauliflower panna cotta with Malpec oyster glaze and Osetra caviar, Côte de saumon, an Atlantic salmon chop with russet potato gnocchi and Perigord truffles. Salmon chop, you're thinking? Salmon ain't got no chops. Yes, they do. Up by the head, there's an oft-neglected triangle of delicious flesh. It's a tricky little piece, usually discarded when chefs cut salmon for uniform portions of filet, because it's an awkward shape and riddled with annoying little bones. At the laundry, a liability has been turned into an asset. There it was on my plate, a perfect little côte de saumon, looking just like a baby lamb chop, one bone extending from a tiny medallion of fish. Sounds cute? It is. A lot of Keller's dishes reveal an abiding sense of whimsy. Whimsy and its unlovely cousin, irony, make appearances on a lot of menus these days, more often than not unsuccessfully. You'll see a menu item with a cute transposition of terms, for instance, tournedos of monkfish, which means nothing more than that the chef is bored with the word medallions or feels insecure about titling his creation little pieces of monkfish. Rarely does the finished product bear any resemblance to the term in its original usage. Now, if you were to serve that little disc of monkfish larded with bacon, topped with a slab of foie gras, and drizzled with a truffle demi-glace, you might be able to get away with calling it tournedos of monkfish Rossini, a direct reference to the old beef classic. But why? It's a dangerous game playing with your food like that. The line between cute and clawing, or worse, pretentious, is a very fine one. But Keller typically is playing at something else here. He's not looking to elevate a less-than-worthy dish by associating it with a beloved classic. More often than not, he's taking something refined and giving it an ordinary, even cliched name, the best examples being his famous coffee and donuts dessert, his Caesar salad, and his grilled cheese sandwich. The one compliment, explains Keller, that I enjoy the most is someone saying, "This reminds me of," and they'll tell you of this wonderful experience they had somewhere else. And I hope that when they go someplace else, they'll say, "This reminds me of the French Laundry." Memory. That's a powerful tool in any chef's kit. Used skillfully, it can be devastatingly effective. I don't know of any other chef who can pull it off so successfully. When you're eating a 4-star meal in one of the world's best restaurants and tiny, almost subliminal suggestions keep drawing you back to the grilled cheese sandwiches Mom used to make you on rainy days, your first trip to Baskin-Robbins, or the first brasserie meal you had in France, you can't help, even the most cynical bastards among us, but be charmed and lulled into a state of blissful submission. It's good enough when a dish somehow reminds you of a cherished moment of fondly remembered taste from years past. Next on the menu, une salade fraîche aux truffes noires with celery branch and celery root vinaigrette, hand-cut tagliatelle with Perigord truffles and grated Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. The truffles were shaved tableside from a magnificent fist-sized monster. Herb-roasted Chatham Bay cod shank with a fricassee of new crop potatoes and applewood smoked bacon emulsion. Again a liability turned into an asset, as the small, usually unservable tail section of fish had been cut across the bone and served like a lamb shank. Lobster Navarin, sweet butter poached Maine lobster with glazed pearl onions, spring vegetables, and sauce Navarin. Another cross-cultural reference, Navarin is usually associated with a heavy, old-school French country classic of braised lamb shoulder. Brioche-crusted confit of North American moulard duck foie gras with braised fennel salad, and telecherry pepper. Gastrique milk-poached four-story Hills Farm poulard au lait with creme fraiche dumplings and bouquetière of spring vegetables. Roasted Bellwether Farms spring lamb with a cassoulet of spring pole beans and thyme-infused extra virgin olive oil. These were the most fetching, tender little lamb chops I'd ever encountered. Roquefort ricotta cheese gnocchi with a Darjeeling tea walnut oil emulsion, shaved walnuts, and grated Roquefort cheese. Hayden mango soup, Aissant brunoise. I love that Aissant brunoise thing, very funny. Haas avocado salad with Persian lime sorbet. Of all the plates that made their way around our table that night, this was the only one that landed with a thud. Scott's comment was, "This is way over my head," but then I'm not that smart. Coffee and donuts, cinnamon sugar donuts with cappuccino semifreddo, looking exactly like a coffee shop donut sitting next to a chock-full-of-nuts cup filled with cappuccino, but marvelous. Millefeuille à la crème de vanille et sans confit d'ananas mignardise. It was an absolutely awe-inspiring meal, accompanied, I should point out, by a procession of sensational wines. Unfortunately, I'm the wrong guy to be talking about wine. All I can tell you is that Scott, who knows about these things, used the word wow a lot. I do remember a big brawny red in a cistern-sized glass which nearly made me weep with pleasure. Cooking had crossed the line into magic. Keller himself is quiet, with a bone-dry, gently sardonic sense of humor and the wary, observant gaze of a totally centered chef who knows what he wants to do and is doing it every day. He seemed annoyed when asked about the roots of his drive for perfection. "Perfect is something you never actually attain," he said. "It's something you search for. Once you reach it, it's not perfect. You've lost it. It's gone." The Scottish, Simon tells me, will deep fry anything. To prove his point, he was taking me to a chip shop for some suppers. We were decidedly not in Edinburgh. Too European, too English, sneered Simon. "They put brown sauce on their fish and chips there," Simon revealed, an outraged look on his face just from remembering the brown home-brewed kitchen bouquet or gravy master concoction. "Brown sauce on fish and chips? No, said Simon. "It's malt vinegar all the way and plenty of salt for Simon, a proud Glaswegian with a typically sardonic sense of humor." He'd been feeding me Guinness all day and showing me around Glasgow, and now it was time, he said, to visit a proper chippy. We ate the traditional fish and chips first, a batter-dipped and deep-fried fillet of cod, or more and more frequently now that the cod population is in decline, haddock, usually served in either a paper cone or a plastic to-go container. "You've got to get a good bit of salt on it," said Simon, following a very healthy sprinkling with a long squirt of malt vinegar. "I could eat Bloody Elvis if you put enough vinegar on him." Smagic. The fish was great. The chips, as everywhere in the UK, were needlessly substandard, limp and soggy. Few chip shop owners bother to blanch their fries in low-temperature oil before frying, so they are never, ever crisp. "The appropriate beverage for this kind of on-the-run Glaswegian repast," said Simon gravely, "is Iron Brew, the popular caffeine-jacked orange-tinted soft drink." We were not really here to do the fish and chip thing. The real wonder is the full potential of the Scottish chip shop lay somewhere deeper. Deep-fried haggis with curry sauce. The crispy cigar-shaped tube of sheep guts and oatmeal, more on that later, was wonderful. The perfect late-night munchie food after a long session drinking Red Bull and vodka, pints of heavy, or Buckfast, a cheap screw-top wine, the Ripple of Scotland. The king rib, whatever that might be, was delicious, though its actual relationship to ribs seemed in doubt. Pre-fried orders of haggis, meat pies, sausages, and fish fillets were crowded next to one another under bulb-lighted glass, ready to be snapped up by hungry drinkers. Everything at the chip shop went into the same hot oil. Carlo, the counterman, unwrapped a Mars bar, dunked it in the universal batter, and dropped it into the oil. When it floated golden brown on the surface, he removed it, sprinkled a little powdered sugar on it, and handed it over. "Careful," said Simon. "Inside, it's bloody napalm." I like grease, I like chocolate, and I like sugar. After addressing any concerns about potential mandibular or maxillary facial damage by allowing the thing to cool down a bit, Simon sawed off a half and presented it to me. It was still tongue-searingly hot, and not bad at all. Simon flashed me an evil smile and enjoyed telling me what was next. "Deep-fried pizza," I said. "Oh, I don't know. That's maybe, I don't know. It seems somehow unnatural." I had a hard time believing that anyone would even consider such an atrocity. Sure enough, Carlo took a cold slice of pre-made frozen pizza, dipped it cheese side down into the batter, and dropped it into the all-purpose trough of grease. "Not bad," I said. "Wait a minute," said Simon as I made to leave. "There's this one thingy we have to try." He told a skeptical-looking Carlo to drop a pickled egg into the batter. We were breaking new culinary ground. "I don't know," I said. "I don't know about this." "This is where my granny would go, 'Holy Mary, Mother of God,'" said Simon, taking a bite and handing me the rest. It was edible. I think one's enjoyment of the chip shop's more esoteric delights has a direct relationship to the amount of alcohol consumed prior to eating. Hot, salty, crunchy, and portable, the previously awful-sounding collection of greasy delights can become a Garden of Eden of heart-clogging goodness when you're in a drunken stupor, hungering for fried snacks. At that precise moment, nothing could taste better. Glasgow has a working-class vibe in the familiar feel of parts of Brooklyn or the Bronx. In many ways, it's the antidote to everywhere else in the world, a city filled with gruff, no-bullshit, often very funny citizens with impenetrable but beautiful accents. Edinburgh is, in my opinion, one of the most strikingly beautiful cities in the world. There's a castle sitting on top of a big rock promontory right in the middle of town. The place drips with history, a crowded tangle of cobblestone streets, ancient buildings, beautiful monuments, none of which weigh the town down. It's got good pubs and bright, shrewd, very sophisticated, and often lavishly educated folks. I love it there, though I feel more at home in Glasgow. For Simon, it's love-hate with Edinburgh. He was not happy that I'd be having my first real haggis experience there, but he found us a very decent place on Edinburgh's High Street just down from the castle, and he assured me that even though we were in, to his mind, the second-best city, the chef here knew what he was doing. What is haggis anyway? For one thing, it's the punchline to 1,000 jokes in America. The thing never to be eaten under any circumstances. What groundskeeper Willie eats. It does sound terrifying to the uninitiated. A hot, gooey mix of sheep's tuck, the whole esophagus, lungs, liver, and heart yanked out in one go, then finely ground, oatmeal, onions, and black pepper. This filling is cooked inside a sheep's stomach, which you don't eat, and then steamed slowly, covered in the oven, then served with neeps and tatties, mashed turnip and potato. As with so many dishes, it originated with the leftovers of the rich landowners, turned into a proud classic by an enterprising and desperate peasantry. A kilted bagpiper's performance preceded the arrival of dinner. With his graying handlebar mustache, he looked suspiciously like the original leather guy in the Village People. Another few seconds of screeching pipes and I'd be reaching into my pocket for a 100-pound note just to make 'em go away. I may love Scotland, but the sound of bagpipes is as alluring as a dentist drill-hitting nerve. Fortunately, our haggis soon arrived, a big, plump, flesh-colored, steaming balloon, tied at both ends and rupturing slightly in the middle, ground meat and oat mixture spilling out like a slowly erupting volcano. As I quietly struggled for words to describe its somehow violent-looking appearance, the fully costumed piper did me one better, yanking a sharp, menacing-looking dirk out of his scabbard, approaching the near-to-bursting membrane, and swinging right into Robert Burns' Address to the Haggis. I couldn't follow too many of the words, though I did catch the phrases gushing entrails and a wondrous, glorious sack, and then the piper slit the stomach fully open with his blade and retreated, leaving us to enjoy our guts. After one mouthful, I couldn't disagree with Scotland's greatest poet. It was glorious. Haggis rules. Peppery, hot, meaty, it didn't taste of anything you might expect in a dish cooked in a stomach. Not really tasting organ-like at all. No bitter livery taste, no chewy mysterious bits, no wet dog taste of tripe. It was in no way offensive to even the most pedestrian American tastes, but subtle and rich in a bourdain noir sort of a way. If you can handle bourdain noir or black pudding or even sautéed calf's liver, you will love haggis. The mashed tatties and neeps provided a perfect counter to the hearty, peppery, oniony oat flavor. Your shepherd's pie in your old high school cafeteria was far more challenging to the palate. If haggis right out of the oven didn't look the way it did, we might all be eating it in America. They'd be serving it from street stands in New York, fried and battered with curry sauce. High-end restaurants would be making haggis sauce and feuilleté of baby bok choy, Yukon Gold potato, and haggis with a whiskey sauce, and stuffing it into metal rings, decorating it with squeeze bottle designs. Scotland has far more to offer hungry pilgrims than grease and guts, however delightful they might be. The Scottish are going through the same foodie gold rush as elsewhere in the UK and Ireland and Australia. And as elsewhere, they are rediscovering what was good all along about their country. The seafood is unbelievable. In Leith, the old waterfront on the Firth outside Edinburgh, there are a number of modest-looking seafood joints serving absolutely smashingly good scallops, salmon, mussels, trout, oysters, and other fish from the North Sea, the Atlantic, and Scotland's many rivers, lochs, and streams. At the most ramshackle, touristy-looking seafood barn, where you'd expect at best to get a decent piece of deep-fried or plain-broiled fish, they're piling tasty little stacks of fresh fish on piles of tasty indigenous vegetables. The technique is good as almost anywhere in New York or London, and the raw ingredients frequently better. Scottish beef is justifiably famous, and Scottish game, venison, grouse, pheasant, wild hare, and rabbit, is perhaps the best in the world. I capped off my Scottish wanderings outside of Inverness in the Highlands on the 25,000-acre estate of the Cobra family. For a guy like me, it's hard to fathom how the rich and the upper classes really live, especially when you're talking about the UK. For Americans, the aristocracy means any talented hustler who's got more than 4 cars and a beachfront pile in the Hamptons. In Scotland, I found out, it means something very, very different. The rich talk differently. They all seem to know one another, and in the case of the Coders and Colin, the 7th Earl of Coder, they tend to go back a ways. His family have been living on this particular Rhode Island-sized expanse of grouse moors, salmon streams, farmland, and forest since the late 13th century. There's a castle in the middle, a structure referred to significantly, if inaccurately, as the residence of Macbeth, the soon-to-be Thane of Cawdor. The Cawdors were kind enough to let me stay at their Drynican Lodge, a hunting, shooting, and fishing retreat on their property, where I'd come to eat wild salmon and to try half-heartedly at first to kill a helpless little bunny rabbit or two. Things were really different here. I don't know any rich people in America who count among their employees not just cooks and servers and housekeepers, but also gamekeepers and foresters. I don't know any wealthy American families that can point to a magnificent forest of tall trees and deep gorges and rushing freshwater streams and say, "My great-great-great-great-grandfather planted that forest." It was breathtakingly beautiful. From my big brass bed, I could see mile after mile of checkerboard-patterned grouse moor, the scrub and heather burned down in carefully controlled alternating square sections to provide optimum living conditions for the much-sought-after grouse. Pheasants wandered carefree just outside my door. Roe deer kept the underbrush to a minimum in the thick forest. Wild salmon literally leapt from crystal-clear streams. For mile after mile, an entire interlocking ecosystem was maintained, and had been maintained for hundreds of years on the sprawling, seemingly never-ending grounds running all the way to the sea. Roddy, the gamekeeper, took me salmon fishing, and he showed me as best he could how to cast a line. I reeled it in across fewer than 2 feet of quick-moving water, hoping that a salmon would become enticed by the fly. The salmon were jumping right out of the water, looking me right in the eye only a few feet away, but proved immune to temptation. Nothing like being proven again and again to be more stupid than a fish. But I didn't care. To stand at the edge of a Highland stream, casting across the water, reeling in, then moving slowly downstream on a brisk, clean, late spring morning, had a hypnotic effect. I didn't mind if I caught anything or not. Fortunately, Ruth, the chef at the lodge, had a good supply of wild salmon on hand, so I wouldn't miss eating some. I'd agreed, once again for purposes of television entertainment, to go rabbit shooting with Roddy. The plan was to bag a few rabbits, take them back to Ruth at the lodge, and have her make us a traditional poacher's stew of rabbit, venison, and cabbage cooked in red wine and stock. Though by now I was reasonably comfortable firing automatic and semi-automatic rifles, handguns, and grenade launchers, given my Cambodian adventures, I had never in my life fired a shotgun, nor had I ever fired a weapon at a living, breathing, fast-moving target. I am in no way supportive of hunting for trophies or sport, would never do it, and don't like it that others do. But if you kill it, then eat it, it's fine. Still, I only agreed to take part in this senseless hunt because I was certain that I'd be hopelessly inept at shooting any rabbits, that I was sure to come up empty. I counted on Roddy, the seasoned professional, to provide enough bunny rabbits for the following day's lunch. I don't know what happened. With my shotgun broken over my arm so as not to shoot any of the TV crew or gamekeepers should I stumble into a pothole on the rough terrain, and the safety on, I spied a rabbit racing for cover about 60 to 80 feet in front or to the side of me. I quickly had to snap the gun closed, raise it, click off the safety, aim, and then fire, all this at a speedy, barely visible little critter that was running and leaping across his own turf. Bam! Very little kick. To my shock and no small amount of dismay, I'd blown the spine out of something that had once looked very much like bugs. "Well shot, sir," said an assistant gamekeeper, retrieving the limp, still warm corpse. Holding my prey, I couldn't resist the need to pet it. So cuddly and adorable. My voice actually cracked a little when I talked to the camera. After each shot, I'd break my smoking weapon, and an assistant would remove the cartridge and replace it. I saw a movement to my left, swung the barrel around, wrapping Chris's camera in the process, and bagged another one tearing along the wall a long ways off. Jesus, I was a murder machine. Now I had 2 sweet-faced little bunny wabbits on my conscience. This was not right. But God help me, I was having fun. Another few hours and I'd be signing up for grouse season. Back at the lodge, Ruth prepared an amazing packed lunch of rabbit and venison stew, nettle soup, slices of air-dried beef, Scottish cheeses, and homemade breads. Then all of us, Chef Ruth, Gloria, the mad and wonderful Glaswegian housekeeper, an assistant gamekeeper, and the crew headed out over the moors to a fishing shack by the edge of a stream. Ruth set up a buffet on a picnic table inside, and we helped ourselves, then sat down on the porch and devoured the fruits of the not-so-great white hunter's toil. It was sensational. Sitting there watching cattle graze on a hillside across the water, listening to Gloria tell Glaswegian jokes, drinking red wine, and watching the tall grass and heather move in the wind, I could hardly imagine a better setting for an afternoon meal. I did, however, begin to fear for my own safety. When this stuff hit the airwaves, when the PETA folks got a load of this, I could be looking at serious trouble. I don't want any vegan terrorists throwing blood on me, particularly not if I'm wearing an expensive jacket. Hopefully my potential adversaries don't get enough animal protein to pose any real threat to my health or wardrobe. But I can't be sure, can I? Maybe I should buy a taser. It's back to my Saigon routine. Mornings at the market, 555 cigarettes and 333 beer. I'm holed up at the Continental, where I should have stayed all along. Just across the street from Gevral's pastry shop and the old municipal theater. Faded photographs of the hotel hang in frames on the walls surrounding the Orchid Garden bar in the courtyard. They date back to the 1880s, depicting straw-hatted French generals, white-suited colonists, satraps, and rickshaws. A much larger, later photograph, dated 1975, shows NVA soldiers resting out in front of the hotel. Across the square is the Caravel, where journalists, spooks, and MACV brass once watched from the top-floor bar as B-52 strikes and airborne Gatling guns carved up the countryside beyond the city. Graham Greene stayed here. His character Fowler used to drink at the cafe downstairs, the Continental Shelf, where 2 Saigon used to gather each evening to drink and gossip. I think I've gone bamboo, as they used to say about British military advisors who'd stayed too long in this part of the world. I've gone goofy on Vietnam, fallen hopelessly, helplessly in love with the place. I'm now accustomed to bowls of spicy pho for breakfast, strong cups of iced espresso over crushed ice with condensed milk at Trung Nguyen, sort of a Vietnamese version of Starbucks, only better. Lunch at the Coms, cheap eateries where I'd have bowls of rice with fish, chicken, or meat. I've come to rely on the smells of jasmine, frangipani, the durian and fish sauce aromas at the markets, the constant buzzing and rumbling from the motos. I have a hard time letting any of the donga pass me by, women carrying portable kitchens on yokes across their shoulders, serving bowls of soup or noodles that are always fresh. Everything is beautiful. Everyone is nice. Everything tastes good. Lin has changed since introducing me to Madame Gao. A few weeks ago, he was all nerves and suspicion. When I told him before leaving for Nha Trang that Philippe might be swinging through town, maybe joining us in Canton, He'd stiffened at the prospect of an unannounced and unanticipated new arrival. He'd have to talk to the People's Committee, he said. People were watching us, he insisted, independently reporting on our activity. This addition to our party was an unexpected and potentially difficult development. Who was this Philippe? What were his intentions? Was he also a journalist? Was he a French or American citizen? During drinks at the roof bar of the Garish Rex, when I left to go to the bathroom, Lynn followed me, making an elaborate show of washing his hands while watching in the mirror to make sure I wasn't emptying a dead drop or whispering into a satellite communicator. But since Nha Trang, he's been relaxed, and since he introduced me to Madame Gao, he's become an absolute pussycat. Madame Gao is a force of nature. The relationship between the matronly, middle-aged restaurant owner, dripping in jade and jewelry, smelling of French perfume, always smartly dressed in well-tailored, businesslike Western attire, and Lin, the young translator and communist functionary, is a mysterious one. When he first took me to a restaurant, Come Nu Saigon, I couldn't figure out why he was so solicitous of her. At first blush, they couldn't seem more different. The cold, efficient Hanoi boy and the warm but mercurial Saigonese woman. Yet Lin never lights a cigarette without first lighting one for her. He pulls out her chair for her. He hangs on her every word, anticipates her needs. When she narrows her eyes, looks around the room, clearly desirous of something, Lin goes on full alert. But then so does everybody else. She may be a tiny Vietnamese version of a Yenta, but underneath her soft features and almost overbearingly generous nature, it's pure steel. She teases him relentlessly. She scolds, pokes, dotes on him, calls him little brother. It is, I finally figured out after a few visits, love. Next time, you bring cookies, chocolate, says Madame Gao, pleased by my gift of flowers, but preferring other things. Chris, Lydia, you happy? I love you, she says, giving them both a big hug and a kiss. You too thin, she says to Chris. Too thin. I think you sick. She snaps her fingers, and across the room an assistant manager and a waiter rush over to serve her. She barks at them in Vietnamese, and a few moments later the manager returns with packets of vitamins, Maalox, and herb tea. Tony, Chris, Lydia, she says, looking worried. You must be very careful. We each receive an identical package and a stern admonition to eat more carefully when outside of Saigon. A few days ago it was bags of Vietnamese coffee. She'd heard me raving how good it was here. When Lydia commented earlier on the toy dogs with bobbing heads on the dashboard of Madame Gao's chauffeured car, she'd presented each of us with a set later in the evening. We all love Madame Gao, and we think she loves us too. I give my heart, make people happy, she says warmly, before snapping her head to the right and fixing a waiter with a brief look of withering scorn. Beers arrive at our table. Ashtrays are emptied. At Madame Gao's restaurant, people are happy. The clean white room is packed with Vietnamese families, tables of 8, 10, 12, 15 people tearing of food all around us, with new guests arriving every minute. They drive right through the dining room, 3 and 4 to a motorbike, then into the backyard parking area. Napkins are popping everywhere from their packets. Every few minutes, a clay pot shatters loudly on the floor, and a sizzling hot rice cake goes flying through the air. The colors on the plates at every table are electric, psychedelic, positively radiating bright reds, greens, yellows, and browns, and it smells good. Lemongrass, lobster, fish sauce, fresh basil, and mint. Come Nu Saigon is the slickest, smartest, sharpest restaurant operation I've seen in a long, long time. Madame Gao, a tiny little middle-aged woman, divorced, living as she is all too willing to tell you, all alone, runs it like a well-drilled battleship. Every table, every corner, every crevice of latticework in the open-air dining room is clean, tight, and squared away. Underneath the broken crockery, even the floor is spotless. The cooks, the waiters, and the managers move like a highly motivated, even terrorized dance troupe. It does not do, I have long since gathered, to disappoint Madame Gao. She's figured out how to run a successful restaurant in a communist country. Come Nu is a loud, casual, comfortable family place with a distinctive gimmick. Madame Gao, reading up on Vietnamese culinary history, found a traditional preparation for rice baked in clay pots. The drill at Come Nu is that when you order a rice side, a waiter retrieves it from the kitchen, smashes the crockery with a mallet, the pieces falling to the floor, then hurls the sizzling hot rice cake across the dining room over the heads of the customers to another waiter, who catches the cake on a plate, flips it, sends it up in the air a few more times like a juggler, then cuts it into portions tableside, dressing it with fish sauce, peppers, sesame, and chives. The room resounds with the noise of breaking and broken crockery. Every few minutes, searingly hot discs of rice go sailing by my ear. It's a tightly controlled riot of food, folks, and fun. Kids standing on their chairs, their moms feeding them, granddad and sons tearing apart lobsters, crabs, and giant prawns, grandmas and dads smoking between courses, everyone chattering, eating, loudly and visibly enjoying themselves. Who is Madame Gao? As she tells you, she's just a lone, hard-working woman, unlucky in love, who loves cookies, chocolate, stuffed animals, which she collects, and continental buffets in large Western hotels. She took us as her guest to one of the bigger, newer ones, absolutely giddy around all those chafing dishes of French and Italian food, the cake stands of Austrian pastries and French petit fours. She's driven everywhere in a new luxury sedan. When it rains, someone is waiting curbside with an umbrella. When she decides at 10:30 at night that she wants us all to have our pictures taken together, she snaps her fingers, barks a few orders, and a frightened-looking photographer arrives in a full sweat only a few minutes later, an old Nikon and flash rig around his neck. Comnu is jammed full every night, as is her other restaurant, a Chinese-themed place down the street. And Madame Gao is at one or both, reigning over her devoted staff and adoring public for most of her waking hours. "I love everybody," she says. "You must give love, give yourself to be success. You love people, they love you back." Food arrives at our clean, newly varnished and polished table. A tofu and dill soup, platters of crunchy, delicious golden zucchini blossoms that have been stuffed with ground pork and seasonings, then batter-dipped and fried. Spring rolls and flash-sautéed spinach with garlic sauce and otherworldly bright green. A stew of pork and egg and coconut broth, the halved-boiled eggs tinged pink around the outer rim of white. Lobster stewed in coconut and chili, redder than red, the plump tail meat a phosphorescent saffron yellow. A whole fish fried and dressed with chili sauce, stir-fried baby bok choy, and of course lots of comnu, the wedges of crispy rice cake from which the restaurant takes its name. Everything is as fresh as I've seen it anywhere in the world, fresher even. The flavors practically explode on my tongue, the colors shimmer. At the end of the meal, platters of ripe custard apple on ice arrive, accompanied by sliced mangoes, papayas, dragon fruit, and pineapple. I've been Madame Gao's guest 3 or 4 times by now, and there is no question in my mind that hers has been the best food I've had in the country. This in a country where everything is already fabulous. Like any really good restaurant lifer, Madame Gao's nervous system is hardwired to every movement in both kitchen and dining room. She has the ability to sense a full ashtray on the other side of the restaurant even when far out of view. One moment she's cooing over Lydia or teasing Lynn for being late to the airport the last time she was in Hanoi, or insisting I try the crab, or worrying over Chris's stomach. The very next second, she's giving orders to a shaking but very competent waiter who has somehow managed to displease her, rebuking him in terrifying, imperious tones. Then it's back to, "I love you, Chris, Lydia, Tony, you happy?" She places her hand over mine and gives it a pat. When she smiles, it's a broad, full-body grin. And I want to hug her, like a beloved aunt. She's a cross between a Jewish mother and the head of the Genovese crime family. Driven, relentless, smotheringly affectionate, dangerous, warm, complicated, and attentive. Though very concentrated on money and things, she has rarely, if ever, allowed us to pay for anything. She's strong. She can be hard. She can be cold. But on our way out the door after dinner, saying goodbye for the last time to our new best friend in Saigon, her face collapses and she bursts into tears. As our car pulls away, she is sobbing, her hand brushing the glass in a combination wave and caress. New Year's Eve in Saigon is a jumbo-sized version of the Song Tudo, the weekend ritual of cruising downtown Saigon, circling the fountain at the intersection of Liloi and Nguyen Hue boulevards. It's the Vietnamese equivalent of low-riding or cruising down Sunset Strip. Thousands, tonight hundreds of thousands of young Vietnamese, dressed in their best button-down shirts, freshly laundered slacks, and ao dais drive in perpetual slow-moving circles through the downtown city streets. They're going nowhere in particular. They don't stop. There is no place to stop anyway. Every inch of Saigon seems filled, tire to tire, with motos and scooters. It takes 20 minutes to cross the street. My plan was to celebrate the new year at Apocalypse Now, a promisingly titled expat bar a few blocks from the Continental. What better place to be when the ball dropped, I thought, than some sinister expat bar in Saigon. I expected opium-addicted ex-mercenaries, aggressive whores in silver minis, long AWOL, white VC, black market hustlers, Aussie backpackers, shriveled French rubber barons, their faces teeming with corruption and the effects of malaria. I expected international rabble, arms dealers, defectors, and hitmen. I'd had such high hopes. But from the moment I step inside, I'm instantly disappointed. Apocalypse Now is a fern bar. There's food. A crowd of well-dressed tourists from America, Canada, and Taiwan sit in a rear dining room among potted palms and Christmas lights, near a buffet of hot entrees, salads, and what looks like Black Forest cake. They sell T-shirts with the movie's logo. Soccer is shown on an overhead projection screen near a small stage. Sunburned blondes with Midwestern accents and Tammy Faye hairdos drink colorful cocktails at a clean Formica bar. I hate the place on sight and retreat back to the streets. 1 minute to midnight outside the Municipal Theater. The traffic is not slowed. No ball appears poised to drop. There are no fireworks. Midnight passes indistinguishable from 5 minutes before or after. No one cheers. No one kisses. Not a single raised fist, shout of Happy New Year, or any acknowledgement that another year has passed in the Western world. It's true the Vietnamese celebrate the Chinese New Year, Tet, but for weeks there have been signs everywhere reading Happy New Year, and people have been calling it out whenever they spy an American or a Westerner. Everyone seems poised to party. The milling crowd's huge, the traffic heavier than ever, but I see not the tiniest indication of any intention to do anything but drive or stand. They've all come out for the event, all these kids as far as the eye can see and beyond. They cluster around a laser light display outside a nightclub as if not knowing what to do next. Dance music blasts from inside, but nobody dances, sways, even taps a foot or drums a finger. It reminded me of my first high school dance, boys on one side, girls on the other, both sides afraid to move. Or have I misunderstood? Are the hundreds of thousands of kids driving in circles all dressed up with no place to go, as the song says? Are they truly indifferent to the infinite delights of 3 chords and a beat? Vietnam seems to have shrugged off the worst of our culture with barely a look back. Is living freely, sang tu do, just driving? Or is it waiting? And for what? It's Tim Rand time. This time I'm going to eat something that will, I am assured, make me very, very strong. The strongest. Hung Rung Flavors of the Forest restaurant is a bright beer garden-like space enclosed by trellis, its foyer crowded with fish tanks. I enter, sit down, and order a beer right away, steadying myself for what will probably be the most unusual meal of my life so far. A grinning waiter approaches holding a wriggling burlap sack. He opens it, gingerly reaches inside, and extracts a vicious, hissing, furious-looking 4-foot-long cobra. As I've ordered the specialty of the house, I assume the staff is inured to the sight. But when the cobra, laid on the floor and prodded with a hooked stick, raises its head and spreads its hood, the whole staff of waiters, busboys, and managers, everyone but my cobra handler, steps back a few feet, giggling nervously. My cobra handler, a nice young man in waiter's black slacks and a white button-down shirt, has a sizable bandage on the back of his right hand, a feature that does not fill me with confidence as he lifts the snake with the stick and holds him over the table, the snake training its beady little eyes on me and trying to strike. I knock back the rest of my beer and try to stay cool, while the cobra is allowed to slide around the floor for a while, lunging every few moments at the stick. The cobra handler is joined by an assistant with a metal dish, a small white cup, a pitcher of rice wine, and a pair of gardening shears. The 2 men pick up the cobra, fully extending him. The cobra handler holds him behind the jaws while the assistant keeps him stretched just ahead of the tail. With his free hand, the handler takes the scissors, inserts a blade into the cobra's chest, and snips out the heart, a rush of dark red blood spilling into the metal dish as he does so. Everyone is pleased. The waiters and busboys relax. The blood is poured into a glass and mixed with a little rice wine. And the heart, a chiclet-sized, oyster-like organ, still beating, is placed gently into the small white cup and offered to me. It's still pumping, a tiny pink and white object moving up and down at a regular pace in a small pool of blood at the bottom of the cup. I bring it to my lips, tilt my head back, and swallow. It's like a little Olympia oyster, a hyperactive one. I give it one light chew, but the heart still beats and beats and beats, all the way down. The taste? Not much of one. My pulse is racing too much to notice. I take a long swig of routiet ran, the blood and wine mixture, enjoying it, not bad at all, like the juice from a rare roast beef, robust but with just a slight hint of reptile. So far, so good. I have eaten the live heart of a cobra. Lynn is proud of me. Many, many sons. The floor staff grin, the girls giggle shyly. The handler and assistant are busily carving up the cobra. An enormous mass of snowy white snake tripes stumble out of the cobra's body cavity onto a plate, followed by a dribble of dark green bile. "This very good for you," says Lynn, as a waiter mixes the bile with some wine and presents me with a glass of roumat ran. It's a violent green color now, looking about as appetizing as the contents of a bedpan. This will make you the strongest. Very special, very special. I have long ago come to dread those words. I take a long swig of the green liquid and swallow. It tastes bitter, sour, evil, just like you'd expect bile to taste. Over the next hour or so, I eat every single part of the cobra. First, a delicious shredded snake salad heavily dressed with citrus and lemongrass and served in a hot pot. Braised cobra with citronella is also quite good, though slightly chewy. The snake's tripe sautéed with onion is absolutely inedible. I chew and chew and chew, grinding helplessly away with every molar. My chewing has not the slightest effect. It's like chewing on a rubber dog toy, only less tender. The tripe, while innocuous tasting, is impossible to break down. I finally give up, hold my breath, and swallow a mouthful whole and intact. The deep-fried bones of the snake are delightful, like spicy potato chips, only a lot sharper. You might enjoy these at a Yankee game, though very carefully. If one bone goes in at the wrong angle, it could easily pierce your esophagus, making the prospects of lasting through the ninth inning doubtful. The cobra's meat, minced and rolled in mint leaves, is also delightful, a festive party snack for any occasion. The manager comes over to present me with a plate containing a large tree grub, white with a black freckle-like mark on one end. It's alive, undulating, bigger than a thumb. Oh, Jesus, no. It squirms around, thrashing on the plate. No, I'm thinking, no, not that. Fortunately, the tree grub is cooked before serving, sautéed in butter until crispy. When it arrives back at my table, perched on a little bed of greens, I warily take a nice-sized bite. It has the consistency of a deep-fried Twinkie, crunchy on the outside, creamy and gooey in the middle. It tastes fine, but I would have been much happier not having seen it alive. Overall, though, not a bad meal. And I've eaten the still-beating heart of a fucking cobra. I'll be dining out on this story for a while. For the very first time after eating food that will make me strong, I actually feel something. I don't know if it's just the nervous energy and adrenaline, but when I walk out into the street, I feel a buzz, a jangly, happy, vibrating sense of well-being. I think, yes, I believe I do feel strong. Monsieur Fowler, someone is whispering. It's the police inspector and Green's The Quiet American talking in my dreams. I wake up expecting to see Fung, the heroine of the novel, preparing an opium pipe for me, and Pyle, the youthful CIA agent, petting his dog in a chair. I'm in my room at the Continental, carved fleur-de-lis in the woodwork, ornate chairs, yards of intricately carved shelving. I can hear the clack-clacking sound of shoes on the wide marble floor outside the door, the sound echoing through the halls. Saigon, still only in Saigon. The French doors leading onto the balcony are open, and though early, the streets are already filling up with cyclos, bicycles, motorbikes, and scooters. Women crouch in doorways eating bowls of pho. A man fixes a motorbike on the sidewalk. Buses cough and stall and start again. At Chevral's across the street, they're lining up for coffee and the short, plump, fragrant-smelling baguettes. Soon the noodle knockers will come, rapping their mallets to announce the imminent arrival of another yoke-borne kitchen, bowls and bowls of steaming fresh noodles. Lynn has informed me of something called fox coffee, a brew made from the tenderest beans fed to a fox, though I've since seen it referred to as a weasel, and the beans later recovered from the animal's stool, washed, presumably, roasted and ground. Sounds good to me. I'm leaving Vietnam soon, and yet I'm yearning for it already. I grab a stack of damp dong off my nightstand, get dressed, and head for the market. There's a lot I haven't tried. I'm still here, I tell myself. I'm still here. The whole concept of the perfect meal is ludicrous. Perfect, like happy, tends to sneak up on you. Once you find it, like Thomas Keller says, it's gone. It's a fleeting thing, perfect. And if you're anything like me, it's often better in retrospect. When you're shivering under 4 blankets in a Moroccan hotel room, the perfect meal can be something no more exotic than breakfast at Barney Greengrass back in New York, the one you had 4 months ago. Your last Papaya King hot dog takes on golden, even mythic proportions when remembered from a distance. I'm writing these words from a beach chair somewhere in the French West Indies. My hand is actually scrawling in wet black ink across a yellow legal pad. I'm not here to eat. I'm here to write and relax, untroubled by phone calls, shoes and socks, visitors, emails, or obligations of any kind. I'm here because I've been on the road for over a year, and I want desperately to stay put, to dig in, to remain in one place and maybe reacquaint myself with my wife. I've been coming to this beach for a long time. The first time I visited back in the 80s, I was still kicking dope, and the blood-warm water felt cold on my skin. My wife and I honeymooned here, blowing every cent a wedding loot on a 2-week kamikaze vacation which left us tanned, happy, totally in love with the island, and utterly broke. Down here, I like to think that I'm not the brutish, obsessive, blustering, blowhard control freak Chef Tony, nor the needy, neurotic, eager-to-please, talking soundbites writer Tony, but the relatively calm, blissed-out, sunstroked, amiable husband Tony, the nicest version of me Nancy's likely to see for 40 days at a clip. A while ago, I looked up from my pad, wiped the sweat out of my eyes, and after consulting my watch, turned to Nancy and said, "Hungry?" She said yes, as I knew she would. We're creatures of habit down here. We have a routine. That meant a short walk across the hot sand to a thatched roof hut with a smoking barbecue grill, a rudimentary bar with 5 or 6 cans of liquor, and 2 coolers of iced Caribs, Red Stripes, and baby Heinekens. Gus, the proprietor, has known us since 1984. And he had a pretty good idea what we wanted. By the time we ducked under the palm fronds into the shade, he'd already cracked 2 Caribs. I ordered the barbecued ribs. Nancy went for the cheeseburger. The service at Gus's is never quick. Our order took about half an hour, normal waiting time on this island. But uncharacteristically, I wasn't impatient at all. I didn't fidget. I didn't look nervously around. I didn't listen for the telltale sounds of a spatula lifting Nancy's burger off the grill, or the bell signaling an order was ready. I knew Keisha, the woman working the grill, and was aware that she did things at her own pace. I didn't care how long it took. I was happy to wait, drinking beer in the shade of Gus's makeshift frond-covered shelter, sand between my toes, hair still wet from the sea, Nancy looking brown and happy and a little bit drunk across from me. My ribs were tender, slightly crispy on the outside, and seasoned with the same adobo spice that Gus puts on everything. If the ribs were marinated in something before grilling, I knew not what, nor did I care. Any critical sensibilities had long ago been put on hold. Nancy's cheeseburger was small, cooked completely through, and topped with a single Kraft cheese slice and a 2 large bun, also seasoned with the ubiquitous adobo. She never finishes her food, so I knew that I'd get at least a bite. Both plates were white, plastic, garnished with soggy French fries, just as I'd expected them to be. Gus's new Shaggy CD played on the sound system for at least the 4th time that day. It will, of course, remain the music from this time on the island. From now on, that CD will always and forever bring me right back here to this time and place. The taste of crispy pork and adobo seasoning, Gus's beach bar, the look on Nancy's face as she sighed distractedly, yawned, stretched, and then tossed one of my rib bones to a stray dog that had been lurking by our table. The dog knew the routine. I've learned something on the road. It doesn't do to waste. Even here, I use everything.
We hope you've enjoyed this program from Harper Audio. To order additional cassettes or CDs, or to receive a complete catalog of Harper Audio and Cadman titles, please call us at 1-800-331-3761. You might also try our website, www.harperaudio.com. Thank you.